October 26, 1938, 8:15 in the morning, Wuhan, China. Captain William Morrison of the U.S. Army Military Intelligence Division crouched behind the rubble of a bombed warehouse, binoculars trained on the Chinese defensive positions across the Yangtze River. What he witnessed through those lenses would shake American assumptions about Chinese military capability to their core. The soldiers, moving with disciplined precision through the trenches, wore German-style Stahlhelm helmets and carried Mauser rifles. They advanced in coordinated formations that bore unmistakable resemblance to Wehrmacht tactics. These weren't the poorly equipped, disorganized Chinese troops that Western military observers had dismissed for decades. "Jesus Christ," Morrison whispered to his aide, Lieutenant Robert Chen. "Those Chinese soldiers are moving like German infantry. Look at that coordination, those tactics. Where the hell did they learn to fight like that?" What Captain Morrison was witnessing was the culmination of nearly a decade of German military cooperation with nationalist China. While America had largely ignored Chinese military development, Nazi Germany had been quietly transforming the Chinese army into a modern fighting force, equipped with German weapons, trained by German officers, and organized according to German military doctrine. The mathematics of transformation were staggering. Over 30,000 Chinese officers had received training from German military advisors. 88 Chinese divisions had been reorganized according to German standards. German factories had shipped 200,000 rifles, 10,000 machine guns, and hundreds of artillery pieces to China. What began as German opportunism in Asian markets had evolved into the most extensive military modernization program in Chinese history. The soldiers fighting Japanese forces at Wuhan were no longer the traditional Chinese army that Western powers had dismissed as militarily insignificant. They were German-trained professionals who would shock the world with their effectiveness. The roots of German-Chinese military cooperation traced to the aftermath of the First World War, when Germany's shattered military establishment sought opportunities beyond the restrictions of the Treaty of Versailles. China, desperate to modernize its antiquated military, represented an ideal partner for circumventing Allied restrictions on German military activities. General Hans von Seeckt, architect of the German Army's post-war reconstruction, first proposed extensive cooperation with China in 1926. Barred from rebuilding German military strength directly, von Seeckt envisioned using China as a testing ground for German military theories and a market for German military expertise. China offers unlimited possibilities for military cooperation, von Seeckt wrote to the German War Ministry in July 1926. "We can provide expertise they desperately need, while gaining practical experience our own military requires. The Chinese market allows development of military relationships impossible in Europe." The initial German military mission to China, led by Colonel Max Bauer in 1927, established the framework for cooperation that would transform Chinese military capability. Bauer's assessment of Chinese potential contradicted Western assumptions about Asian military inferiority. "Chinese soldiers possess excellent basic qualities," Bauer reported to Berlin. "They are disciplined, courageous, and capable of absorbing advanced military training. With proper organization and equipment, Chinese forces could become formidable military instrument." This evaluation launched a partnership that would challenge fundamental American assumptions about Chinese military capability and German strategic intentions in Asia. The German military mission expanded dramatically under Colonel Georg Wetzel, who arrived in China in 1928 with ambitious plans for military modernization. Wetzel established training centers, reorganized Chinese military education, and began the systematic transformation of Chinese military doctrine. Wetzel's reforms focused on creating professional officer corps trained in German military methods. The Central Military Academy at Nanjing was reorganized according to German military education standards, with German instructors teaching tactics, strategy, and military science to Chinese cadets. Lieutenant Colonel Chen Cheng, one of the first Chinese officers trained under German supervision, later described the transformation. "German instructors taught us modern military science that Chinese military had never encountered. We learned coordination, communications, logistics, and combined arms tactics that revolutionized our understanding of warfare. The impact extended beyond individual training to systematic reorganization of Chinese military structure. German advisors implemented divisional organization, standardized equipment, and centralized command systems that replaced traditional Chinese military organization based on personal loyalties and regional affiliations. By 1930, over 5,000 Chinese officers had completed German military training programs. These officers returned to their units carrying German military doctrine, German training methods, and German standards of military professionalism that began transforming the Chinese army from within. The arrival of General Hans von Zicht as chief German military advisor in 1933 marked the peak of German-Chinese military cooperation. Von Zicht, the father of the German army, brought to China the full weight of German military expertise and the resources of the Nazi state. Von Zicht's mission represented unprecedented military cooperation between Germany and China. With explicit support from Hitler's government, von Zicht was authorized to modernize Chinese military capability, using the most advanced German military methods and equipment available. The Chinese army will be rebuilt according to German standards, von Zicht declared upon arriving in Shanghai. We will create modern military force capable of defending Chinese territory against any aggressor. This cooperation serves German interests while providing China with military capability it requires. Von Zicht's modernization program focused on creating elite Chinese divisions trained and equipped to German standards. The 36th Division, redesignated as the 1st Teaching Division, became the prototype for German-trained Chinese units that would shock foreign observers with their effectiveness. The transformation included complete reorganization of Chinese military logistics, communications, and training systems. German advisors established military schools, weapon depots, and communication networks that provided Chinese forces with modern military infrastructure previously unavailable. Colonel Seu, Hermann Kriebel, von Zicht's deputy, supervised the practical implementation of German training methods. Kriebel established training centers where Chinese soldiers learned German infantry tactics, artillery coordination, and engineering techniques that revolutionized Chinese military capability. "We are creating a new Chinese army," Kriebel reported to Berlin in 1934. Chinese soldiers trained in German methods demonstrate proficiency equal to European standards. Their progress exceeds our most optimistic projections. This assessment would prove prophetic when German-trained Chinese forces encountered Japanese armies in sustained combat. The equipment modernization accompanying German training represented the largest military technology transfer in Chinese history. German factories shipped massive quantities of military equipment to China, ranging from small arms to heavy artillery and military vehicles. The German firm Rheinmetall supplied Chinese forces with 20mm anti-aircraft guns, 3.7cm anti-tank guns, and 15cm howitzers that provided Chinese artillery with capabilities previously unavailable. Mauser delivered 200,000 rifles specifically manufactured for Chinese forces. German military advisors supervised the establishment of Chinese arms factories designed to produce German-designed weapons domestically. The Central Arsenal at Nanjing was reorganized to manufacture German pattern rifles, machine guns, and ammunition, according to German quality standards. The scope of equipment transfer impressed even German officials. General Wilhelm Keitel, later chief of the German Armed Forces High Command, observed Chinese forces during a visit in 1936. Chinese units equipped with German weapons and trained by German advisors demonstrate military capability that rivals European armies. This cooperation has created formidable military force in Asia. American intelligence remained largely ignorant of the extent of German-Chinese military cooperation. The U.S. military attaché in Shanghai, Colonel E.A. Joseph Stilwell, dismissed early reports of Chinese military improvement as exaggerated propaganda. Chinese forces remain essentially medieval military organization, despite claims of modernization, Stilwell reported to Washington in 1935. No amount of foreign training can overcome fundamental Chinese deficiencies in military organization and fighting spirit. This assessment reflected widespread American prejudice about Asian military capability that would be shattered by Chinese performance in combat against Japanese forces. The German training program produced Chinese officers who combined traditional Chinese military virtues with modern German military science. These officers understood both Chinese military culture and German military methods, creating unique synthesis that enhanced rather than replaced Chinese military strengths. General Li Zongren, commanding the 5th Army Group, exemplified this synthesis. Trained by German advisors but retaining Chinese military traditions, Li combined German tactical methods with Chinese strategic thinking to create innovative approaches to military problems. German training taught us modern military methods, Li later wrote in his memoirs, but we adapted these methods to Chinese conditions and Chinese military culture. The result was not imitation of German army but creation of distinctly Chinese military force enhanced by German expertise. This adaptation process created Chinese military capability that impressed foreign observers, while remaining authentically Chinese in character and leadership. The first test of German-trained Chinese forces came during the January 28th incident in Shanghai during 1932. The 19th Route Army, partially trained by German advisors, demonstrated unexpected effectiveness against Japanese forces in urban combat. Japanese commanders, expecting easy victory against traditional Chinese forces, encountered organized resistance that employed modern military tactics and equipment. Chinese forces used coordinated artillery support, communication systems, and defensive positions that reflected German military training. General Oi Seichi, commanding Japanese forces in Shanghai, reported to Tokyo, "Chinese resistance demonstrates military competence previously unobserved. Their organization, equipment, and tactics suggest foreign military assistance of high quality. Chinese fighting capability has been significantly underestimated." This early demonstration of improved Chinese military effectiveness foreshadowed the shock that would greet American observers during the Battle of Wuhan. The expansion of German-Chinese military cooperation under General Alexander von Falkenhausen, who succeeded von Seeckt in 1935, reached unprecedented levels. Von Falkenhausen supervised the training of over 30,000 Chinese officers and the reorganization of 88 Chinese divisions according to German standards. Von Falkenhausen's mission included establishing Chinese military industries, capable of producing German-designed weapons and equipment domestically. German technical advisors supervised construction of arsenals, ammunition factories, and vehicle assembly plants that provided China with military-industrial capability. The scope of cooperation impressed German military leaders. General Ludwig Beck, chief of the German General Staff, visited China in 1936 and reported, "Chinese military development under German guidance has exceeded all expectations. China possesses military potential that could significantly influence Asian balance of power. This potential would be tested when full-scale war erupted between China and Japan in July 1937. The Battle of Shanghai, beginning in Ma'asetsan, August 1937, provided the first large-scale test of German-trained Chinese forces against a major military power. Chinese forces defending Shanghai included multiple divisions trained and equipped according to German standards. The 87th Division and 88th Division, elite units trained by German advisors, demonstrated military effectiveness that shocked Japanese commanders. These divisions employed German tactical methods, used German weapons, and fought with discipline that contradicted Japanese assumptions about Chinese military capability. Lieutenant Colonel Tanaka Ryukichi, Japanese military attaché, observed Chinese defensive operations and reported, "Chinese forces demonstrate organization and fighting effectiveness previously unknown. Their tactics, equipment, and discipline suggest extensive foreign military assistance. Japanese assumptions about Chinese military inferiority require fundamental revision. The performance of German-trained Chinese forces at Shanghai established their credibility as modern military units capable of sustained operations against first-class opponents." Captain Evans Carlson, U.S. Marine Corps observer at Shanghai, witnessed Chinese military performance that challenged his preconceptions. Carlson's reports to Washington described Chinese forces that bore little resemblance to traditional American stereotypes. Chinese divisions defending Shanghai demonstrate military professionalism equal to any I have observed, Carlson reported. Their organization, tactics, and equipment reflect advanced military training and modern military doctrine. These are not the disorganized Chinese forces described in previous intelligence assessments. Carlson's observations marked the beginning of American recognition that Chinese military capability had been fundamentally transformed through foreign cooperation. The retreat from Shanghai to Nanjing in late 1937 showcased German-trained Chinese forces conducting complex military operations under extreme pressure. Chinese units demonstrated ability to conduct coordinated withdrawals, maintain unit cohesion, and execute defensive operations that reflected advanced military training. General Tang Enbo, commanding Chinese forces during the withdrawal, employed German tactical methods to preserve military effectiveness despite strategic retreat. Chinese forces conducted fighting withdrawals that inflicted significant casualties on Japanese pursuers while maintaining organizational integrity. American observers noted the professionalism displayed by Chinese forces during this difficult operation. Major Frank Dorn, U.S. Army observer, reported, Chinese military performance during withdrawal operations demonstrates advanced military training and effective leadership. These forces exhibit capabilities that challenge fundamental assumptions about Chinese military potential. The defense of Nanjing, though ultimately unsuccessful, demonstrated the effectiveness of German military training in preparing Chinese forces for modern warfare. Chinese defenders employed coordinated defensive tactics, effective use of artillery, and disciplined military organization that impressed foreign observers. German military advisors supervised Chinese defensive preparations and coordinated the integration of various Chinese units into coherent defensive system. The result was military performance that exceeded all previous Chinese military achievements. General Alexander von Falkenhausen, observing Chinese defensive operations, reported to Berlin, Chinese forces trained under German supervision demonstrate military effectiveness comparable to European armies. Their performance validates German training methods and Chinese military potential. The fall of Nanjing in December 1937 marked a strategic defeat, but demonstrated Chinese military capability that would influence subsequent American assessments of Chinese potential as a military ally. The withdrawal of Chinese forces to Wuhan provided opportunity for regrouping and reorganization that would showcase German-trained Chinese military capability at its peak. Chinese forces defending Wuhan included the best German-trained divisions available to the Chinese army. The Chinese forces that would defend Wuhan represented the culmination of nearly a decade of German military cooperation. These units possessed German weapons, employed German tactics, and demonstrated military professionalism that would shock American observers. General Chen Cheng, commanding Chinese forces at Wuhan, had been trained by German advisors and implemented German military methods throughout his command. Chen's forces represented the finest example of German-Chinese military cooperation in action. October 26, 1938, marked the climax of Chinese resistance at Wuhan, and the moment when American observers fully grasped the extent of Chinese military transformation. The Battle of Wuhan would demonstrate Chinese military capability that contradicted every American assumption about Asian military potential. Captain William Morrison's observation of Chinese forces at Wuhan revealed military units that employed German equipment, German tactics, and German organizational methods with effectiveness that challenged Western prejudices about Chinese military capability. The Chinese 7th Army Group, defending the northern approaches to Wuhan, demonstrated coordinated defensive operations that utilized German anti-tank guns, German artillery coordination, and German infantry tactics adapted to Chinese conditions and Chinese leadership. Lieutenant Robert Chen, serving as Morrison's translator and aide, possessed unique perspective as Chinese-American officer witnessing Chinese military performance. Chen's reports to U.S. intelligence provided detailed analysis of Chinese military capabilities observed during the Wuhan defense. Chinese forces defending Wuhan demonstrate military professionalism and effectiveness that challenges every preconception about Chinese military potential, Chen reported. These soldiers employ advanced tactics, modern equipment, and disciplined organization that reflects extensive foreign military training of highest quality. The defense of Wuhan showcased Chinese military engineering capabilities developed under German supervision. Chinese forces constructed elaborate defensive positions, coordinated artillery support, and maintained communication systems that reflected German military engineering standards. Chinese artillery units, trained by German advisors and equipped with German guns, demonstrated accuracy and coordination that impressed professional military observers. The integration of artillery support with infantry operations reflected advanced military training previously unavailable to Chinese forces. Major James McHugh, U.S. military attaché, observed Chinese artillery operations and reported, "Chinese artillery demonstrates technical proficiency and tactical effectiveness equal to any I have observed. Their coordination with infantry operations reflects advanced military training and professional military leadership." The performance of Chinese air defense units, equipped with German anti-aircraft guns and trained by German instructors, demonstrated capabilities that surprised Japanese air commanders. Chinese forces shot down significant numbers of Japanese aircraft using coordinated anti-aircraft tactics. The shock experienced by American observers extended beyond military performance to psychological impact. Witnessing Chinese forces that challenged fundamental assumptions about Asian military capability forced reconsideration of Chinese potential as military ally. Captain Morrison's detailed reports to Washington described Chinese military performance that contradicted decades of American intelligence assessments. Morrison's observations forced American military leadership to confront their own prejudices about Chinese military potential. The Chinese army observed at Wuhan bears no resemblance to forces described in previous intelligence reports, Morrison wrote. These are modern military units employing advanced tactics, modern equipment, and professional military organization. American assumptions about Chinese military inferiority are completely incorrect. The equipment visible during the Wuhan defense revealed the extent of German military cooperation with China. Chinese soldiers carried German Mauser rifles, wore German-style helmets, and used German military equipment throughout their defensive operations. Chinese machine gun units employed German MG-34 machine guns with effectiveness that demonstrated advanced training in their use. The coordination between different weapons systems reflected German training in combined arms tactics, adapted to Chinese military organization. The German-trained Chinese officers commanding at Wuhan demonstrated military competence that impressed American observers. These officers combined German military training with Chinese military culture to create effective military leadership uniquely suited to Chinese conditions. General Xue Yue, commanding Chinese forces in the Wuhan area, exemplified this synthesis of German training and Chinese leadership. Trained by German advisors but retaining Chinese military traditions, Xue demonstrated innovative tactical thinking that adapted German methods to Chinese strategic requirements. The communication systems employed by Chinese forces at Wuhan reflected German training in military communications and coordination. Chinese units maintained contact with higher headquarters and coordinated operations with effectiveness that demonstrated advanced military organization. The medical services supporting Chinese forces during the Wuhan defense showed German influence in military medicine and logistics. Chinese medical units employed German methods for treating battlefield casualties and maintaining military medical support under combat conditions. German military advisors, though officially withdrawn from frontline positions due to German-Japanese diplomatic agreements, had provided Chinese forces with training and equipment that enabled independent operations at German military standards. The withdrawal of German advisors in 1938, necessitated by German alliance with Japan, demonstrated that Chinese forces had successfully absorbed German military methods and could operate independently using German-trained officers and German military doctrine. General Alexander von Falkenhausen, the last German military advisor to serve with Chinese forces, Assessed Chinese military development. Chinese forces have successfully absorbed German military methods and demonstrated ability to operate independently. Our training mission has succeeded beyond original expectations. American intelligence assessments following the Wuhan defense acknowledged fundamental errors in previous evaluations of Chinese military potential. The performance of German-trained Chinese forces forced complete revision of American understanding of Chinese military capability. Colonel Joseph Stilwell, previously dismissive of Chinese military potential, revised his assessments following observations of Chinese performance. At Wuhan, Chinese military performance demonstrates capabilities that invalidate previous intelligence estimates. Chinese forces possess military potential that requires complete re-evaluation of their role in Asian strategic balance. The strategic implications of Chinese military transformation extended beyond immediate military performance to long-term considerations of Asian balance of power. Chinese military capability demonstrated at Wuhan suggested potential for sustained resistance against Japanese expansion. American policymakers, previously dismissive of Chinese military potential, began considering China as potential ally capable of meaningful military contribution to resistance against Japanese aggression. The German-trained Chinese army represented significant military asset in Asian strategic calculations. The lessons learned from German-Chinese military cooperation influenced subsequent American military assistance programs in China. American advisors studied German training methods and adapted successful elements for American military assistance programs. The success of German military training in China demonstrated that Asian military forces could achieve European military standards when provided with appropriate training, equipment, and organization. This lesson would influence American military cooperation throughout Asia in subsequent decades. The German-Chinese military cooperation that shocked American observers at Wuhan represented intersection of German strategic opportunism and Chinese military modernization needs. The partnership produced military capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about Asian military potential. The Chinese soldiers observed by Captain Morrison at Wuhan were products of systematic military transformation that combined German military expertise with Chinese military culture. They represented possibility for Asian military forces to achieve parity with Western military standards. The aftermath of Wuhan demonstrated both achievements and limitations of German-Chinese military cooperation. While Chinese forces had achieved unprecedented military effectiveness, strategic limitations prevented decisive victory against Japanese industrial and military superiority. The withdrawal from Wuhan marked end of Chinese attempts to defend major cities using conventional military methods. Subsequent Chinese strategy emphasized guerrilla warfare and strategic depth rather than positional defense using German military methods. However, the military training and organization provided by German cooperation continued to influence Chinese military development throughout the war. German-trained officers provided leadership for Chinese forces in both conventional and guerrilla operations against Japanese occupation. The shock experienced by American observers at Wuhan marked beginning of American recognition of Chinese military potential that would influence wartime alliance and subsequent military cooperation. Chinese military capability demonstrated through German training helped establish China as significant military ally. The German military advisors who had transformed Chinese military capability represented successful model of military cooperation that transcended cultural and racial boundaries. Their achievement demonstrated potential for effective military cooperation between Western and Asian military forces. The Chinese officers trained by German advisors became nucleus of Chinese military leadership that would continue to influence Chinese military development long after German cooperation ended. Their training provided foundation for Chinese military modernization that continued throughout the 20th century. The weapons and equipment provided through German cooperation gave Chinese forces technological capability that enhanced their effectiveness against Japanese forces. German military technology provided Chinese forces with modern weapons previously unavailable. The organizational methods taught by German advisors provided Chinese forces with military structure that enhanced coordination and effectiveness. German. Military organization adapted to Chinese conditions, provided framework for effective military operations. The tactical training provided by German advisors gave Chinese forces modern military methods that enhanced their battlefield effectiveness. German tactical doctrine adapted to Chinese strategic requirements provided Chinese forces with effective military capabilities. The strategic thinking developed through German cooperation provided Chinese military leadership with modern strategic concepts that enhanced their ability to coordinate large-scale military operations. German strategic doctrine influenced Chinese military planning throughout the war. The psychological impact of demonstrating Chinese military effectiveness challenged Western prejudices about Asian military capability that had influenced international relations throughout the early 20th century. Chinese military performance forced reconsideration of Asian military potential. The diplomatic implications of Chinese military effectiveness demonstrated through German cooperation influenced American decisions to provide military assistance to China during the war. Chinese military capability justified American investment in Chinese resistance against Japanese aggression. The historical significance of German-Chinese military cooperation extends beyond immediate military impact to demonstration of potential for cross-cultural military cooperation. The success of German training methods in Chinese military context demonstrated possibility for effective military cooperation across cultural boundaries. The legacy of German-trained Chinese forces influenced Chinese military development throughout the 20th century. Training methods, organizational structure, and military doctrine introduced through German cooperation continued to influence Chinese military development long after German advisors departed. The shock experienced by American observers at Wuhan represented a moment of recognition that Chinese military forces possessed capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about Asian military potential. This recognition influenced American military cooperation with Asian allies throughout subsequent decades. Today, military historians recognize German-Chinese military cooperation of the 1930s as a successful example of military modernization through international cooperation. The transformation of Chinese military capability demonstrated possibility for rapid military modernization when appropriate expertise, equipment, and organization are provided. The soldiers observed by Captain Morrison at Wuhan represented culmination of systematic military transformation that challenged every assumption about Chinese military potential. They demonstrated that military excellence transcends cultural and racial boundaries when proper training, equipment, and leadership are provided. The German advisors who trained Chinese forces proved that military cooperation could successfully bridge cultural differences to produce effective military capability. Their achievement demonstrated potential for international military cooperation that transcends national and cultural boundaries. America was shocked after seeing Chinese soldiers trained and equipped by Germany because these forces contradicted every American assumption about Chinese military capability. The shock reflected American prejudices more than Chinese limitations. The German-trained Chinese forces observed at Wuhan demonstrated that military excellence could be achieved through systematic training and appropriate equipment regardless of cultural background. They proved that military capability depends on training, organization, and equipment rather than racial or cultural characteristics. The transformation of Chinese military capability through German cooperation established precedent for international military modernization programs that would influence military development throughout the developing world. The success of German training methods in Chinese context demonstrated possibility for effective military cooperation across cultural boundaries. The Chinese soldiers who shocked American observers at Wuhan were products of successful military cooperation that transcended cultural and national boundaries. They represented possibility for military excellence through systematic training and appropriate equipment that would influence military development worldwide.